Okay, so thank you, Syria. Syria, I think that with your welcome, everyone, you actually officially launched our Vet Governance in Action. So thank you, everybody, for being with us today with ETF. And before starting, I would just quickly show you a slide on Zoom functionalities, although I'm sure actually all of you are super acquainted with this online platform, but it's just as a kind of recap. You know, left side at the bottom of your screen, you can mute and mute your microphone. Then you can also stop your video. You can see in the bottom participants, the list of participants. This is also the place where you can raise your hand to speak. And actually, you can use the chat for the question. And here you have the possibility either to chat bilaterally or to be inclusive and chat with everyone. So basically, in a super nutshell, this is what the Zoom is about. You have also two kinds of view, the speaker view and the gallery view. I would suggest to have the gallery view. And actually, before starting, just to remind you, online meeting rules, please kindly keep your microphone muted because we have some echo and I'm hearing some voices, which I'm happy to hear because I don't feel alone. But this can actually disturb the evolving of the meeting. So please mute your microphone. Whenever you have a question, you have actually two options. Either you raise your hand, not physically, but actually, as I just showed you with under the participant tab, or you simply write in a chat. So you can use one of the two modality. In any case, there will be space for question and answer. There will be a lot to say about, but before really entering into this experience together, actually, I would like also to welcome the participants which are following us through the streaming in the ETF open space. Now that we said welcome to everyone, I think that I have to pass the floor to Xavier Mateu de Cortada, the head of policy unit here at ETF, to tell us a few words. Xavier, is to you.
Thank you very much, Simona. And good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Vet Governance in Action webinar. Let me first of all thank all the participants today. We see here a very broad representation from different governmental agencies, ministries, private organizations, social partners, civil society organizations from Europe and from neighboring countries. Some are operating in international environment, some others working at national level or even at local level. So thank you very much. This, I think, it's best way to discuss governance today, because the way ETF understands governance is about a multi-actor and multi-level approach. So that's what we try to see here today represented. I think it's a good environment to start discussing about that. And in particular in education and training, and even if in the approach that ETF is supporting of a lifelong learning approach, this multi-level and multi-actor approach is even more important, more essential. In fact, this policy area of lifelong learning is a complex system that there is a convergence of different policy areas, from economic development, enterprise competitiveness, social fairness, cohesion, education. So it's different areas are all finding themselves all together here. And there are, of course, many actors that from state to non-state actors who have a stake in vocational skills and for employment and lifelong learning, and more broadly. So the advantage of multi-actor and multi-level approaches in governance is that they are better posed to linking the objectives of policy with the actual implementation and delivery of policy. And this is an essential way of finding the implementation of these policies more efficient. So the Vet Governance Toolkit has been designed by ETF as to support a participatory approach to governance based on these considerations, and the consultation of all actors involved, the sharing of responsibilities and the coordination of actions in vocational education and training and in lifelong learning functions better work if they are organizing this way rather than if they are centralized in a rigid and vertical approach. But the second thing is that despite these approaches, we think that they are make more efficiently implementation of vet policy. We always find in much of the countries that the vet and in lifelong learning are in reform in many countries. So we also think that this webinar today, the objective is that we always want to show that this governance arrangement need to improve also when there is we're in a reform environment. Like that, we can address the question of if governance arrangements are fit for purpose when those reforms are taking place. We're changing a system, the governance arrangements should change too. So let's put the two examples. One is the COVID crisis that we are just still in. We've seen that the places where they've been managed better the situation is where they have better resilience. And there is where there's better arrangements between the different actors. An example is if a school was already working with different other organizations in the territory, with some companies and with the local authorities and even some international projects, in the moment where the school was closed, there was better ways of finding solutions to bring distance learning to their students. If the school was isolated, was not working with anyone, was just working perhaps very well inside, at the moment that the school was closed, it was very difficult for them to start producing this other means for their students. Similar happens with a company. We've seen companies that were closed because there was no supplies for the companies, but the companies were very well connected with the local authorities. They were very well connected with the hospitals in the territory and so on. So they started to change their production and they started to produce some breathing machines or some mask or whatever. So they easily reacted to this situation because they were already embedded in an ecosystem of relationships with other actors. So if we want to, if this COVID crisis shows that we have to be more agile, also this multi-level governance arrangement have to go in this direction, and how the decision making can improve to be more flexible and more inclusive, how the partnership between public and private actors can be more responsive, more smart. So these are issues that we see that in a change of policy situation, we need also to review the governance arrangement. Another example is now last week or 2 weeks ago, there was the new declaration of this Copenhagen process, the so-called now Osnabrück Declaration. We see that there are different priorities in order to new targets to have a more accessible, equitable, and high-quality learning opportunities for all. Okay, this means that probably, if not the priority, goes more in reskilling and upskilling people who perhaps are not young people but adults working already in the employment. Probably the governance arrangements that were more useful to make schools more accessible and attractive are not the same as those that we are now with this new policy arrangement. Simona, I'm finishing. The toolkit is composed of 7 areas, and they will be presented today, which go from how to develop a vision, how to develop institutional arrangements, financement, partnership, territorial governance, and so on. So we want to show today how the content of this toolkit and how it can be used. And we will have an overview, but in the future we can go a little bit more specific focus on some of the areas of the toolkit. So I stop here. We look forward to for your feedback, and I wish you a very good webinar. Back to you, Simona.
Super, thanks, Xavier. Special thanks actually goes to Xavier because we know that today is jumping from one meeting to the other. So thank you so much for taking the time for being with us. It has been a privilege and a pleasure.
It's December.
It's December, it's Christmas time, although it doesn't look like, at least in Italy. So, okay. Allora, having said that, who is here today with you and why we are here today? So to reply to these two questions, the ETF team today is actually me, who are just the entertainer, basically. Then the real people around the table for you today is Miss Siria Taurelli, who is actually, allow me to call her a pillar of governance and lifelong learning in ETF, an historical expert. Together with Madame Siria, we have Jose Manuel Galvin, although Manuel, I'm sorry, I don't remember the full last name. So Manuel, to make it short, who is actually our responsible person for methodologies and analytical framework when it comes to governance, and actually, again, another historical expert. And together with Syria, they're really those who take the lead in the ETF cooperation with all the international organization and international panorama on governance. But the story doesn't end here. We also have Erica that you don't see now, but you will see later, unless you want to switch on the camera. And actually, she's the Deus Ex Machina, which means that nothing of this would happen without her. We also have Anna, who is our event designer, and actually she will help us in all the streaming, technical production. So we have these two wonderful people, which makes the engine going on. I'm trying to speak a bit quickly, and I'm sorry, although I usually speak very quickly as Italian, just because I want to stick to the time we have planned. So the agenda of the day. We are here to discuss vet governance in action. We actually will have an introduction on the vet governance toolkit, which will be made by Syria. Then we will have, of course, a space for question and answers, conversation and input. That will be your time for being with us and talking to us. And then we will have two breakout rooms, which means two working groups where actually we will talk more in depth about certain topics, which I will announce later in the day, not now yet. And so we will have a kind of discussion on next steps and conclusion. So having said that, I think that without any indulgence, I would like to ask you all to look at the chat. You have in the chat, you have a link for Mentimeter. Go in the chat. You see there is a button just next to participants and click on the link. You will be redirected to a tool where we would like to ask you a couple of questions, which will be essential for us in order to also build upon live, basically, also the presentation and the discussion we want to have today with you. Can I assume, since now we are screen sharing, that most of you are already in the link and you are already see this guy moving a lot and telling you are all ready for this? I guess so. Just a plea for me as entertainer of the day. If you can keep your camera on, if your environment allow for it, it would be very pleasant for me. Okay, so I think we can launch the first question. And when I think I can launch the first question, I'm referring to actually Erica. We see the number. So we see that for the moment, only 7 people replied. I tell you again, go in the chat, click on the link you will find on the chat in Mentimeter. You will be redirected and then just reply. It's very important for us to understand how would you describe the governance of a vet in your country, because it's just to have an idea, a flavor of what is the situation around us, because we might have a different perception. So I think I would leave few more seconds. The more replies and the better it is, in the sense that then we are able to really taste what is around. At least the good news is that few are replying, but we have 0 under I don't know. So at least those who are replying are at least aware of how governance of vet is dealing in the country. Let's go. You see, it's very quick. Let's go to the second question. What does vet governance involve? Please use one word. We see that the words are coming out straight away are coordination, cooperation, prioritization, shared responsibility. You know that the more write the same word, and the more basically the word become bigger. So, but most of you, I'm sure, knows the word cloud philosophy. So I would actually leave just 3-4 seconds more. I think that cooperation and coordination are actually the winners of the day. So talking about coordination and cooperation, and also want to introduce a new concept, the competition, coordination and competition, which sometimes can help productivity. I think that without any indulgence, I can pass the floor to Syria. And now actually we go to the gritty, meaty part of our days together. Syria, the floor is yours. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, and good morning again, or good afternoon, depending where you are. Actually, I'm very happy to start from cooperation and coordination, and I will guide you through the next slide. I will guide you through actually what do we mean by governance in vocational education and training on the base of both some theoretical approach, but very much also based on the practice and experience of the ETF work in vocational education and training and lifelong learning. And the first thing that I would like to highlight is actually that nowadays the definitions of governance, which is the activity of governing, highlight a wide range of factors and stakeholders. We can say of factors and actors. So this is about the institutions, but also the processes and traditions that interact. And we can observe a multiplicity of actors that play a role in the governance. So this is a move away from more traditional definitions, which instead used to attribute almost exclusive role to the state. So the governance was the business of the government, and it referred to laws, administrative rules, judicial rulings and practices that either constrain or enable the activities of the government. So here we are actually talking about a wider range of factors. And in this slide, we can see two relevant definitions of multi-level governance. Xavier, in his introduction, explained that ETF refers and applies the concept and approach of multi-level governance, which under the broad definition of governance actually explains that multi-level governance is about making decisions. This is an exercise in power. This is normal in terms of governance. But the important part is that these decisions are binding for a multiplicity of actors. And these actors are in a state of interdependence one with another. They are public, they're private, they are located or they operate at different levels of territorial aggregation. They can be, and they are most often politically independent, but in terms of the system they operate within, and in our case, this is a vocational education and training, they are interdependent. So when they make a decision, actually, this affects other part of the system. And the other definition on the right hand of the screen by Oliver, which is equally relevant, talks again about the fact that multi-level governance is about how the power is exercised and decisions are taken. But in a similar way to the previous definition, it really highlights the issue of the interactions among the institutions and processes. So it's not only as it used to be about the power and decision within the governmental institutions, but it's a lot about the processes that engage a number of different actors. And you see that in both definitions, is highlighted in green, there is a reference, very interesting, to processes and also mechanisms. They are negotiation, they are deliberations, and the way a policy is actually implemented. But it is also about how the stakeholders, including the citizens, have their say. So we have the actors, we have the processes, and we have to pay very much attention about the how. And this also means that for how things and policies are implemented, we need mechanism. This is important because we will come back to that also in terms of the Vet Governance Toolkit of the ETF. So we take the initial definition and we try to apply in vocational education and training. This is a work done by the ETF, but also obviously based and inspired by the Committee of the Region of the European Union, as well as CEDEFOP. But the work of and the development of the team of experts in ETF really try to focus on what does multi-level governance mean for vocational education and training, in particular if we refer to the third countries, neighboring countries that surround the European Union. So we like to define, or we have tested in practice and learned from experience that multi-level governance in VET is about making policy on the basis of coordinated action and shared responsibility among various public and private stakeholders at all levels, from international down to regional and local level. And also, this is an important element at all stages of the policy cycle. Therefore, this coordinated action and contribution and participation, as Xavier put it at the beginning, it happens from the objective setting, from the strategic development, say the agenda setting of the VET policy, down to implementation with the monitoring, because we do monitor while policies are implemented, and eventually at the stage of reviewing, assessing, evaluating the effectiveness of the VET policy. So then we see that there is also an important addition here about the good governance. So while we ensure that actors are involved and the stakeholders have their say at their level, depending on their level of responsibility, we also take care that the governance ensures the relevance of the policy, the accountability of those who are responsible, the transparency of the decision process, and on the way the institutional arrangement and cooperation mechanism are defined. So let's not forget about not only the technicalities, but about the policy objectives and the, say, environment of the governance that we aim to be a good governance. Okay, so after this short introduction, what does ETF do in terms of multi-level governance in VET? And we shall become used to expanding into lifelong learning more generally, because this is the clear priority and policy of the European Union. We distinguish two main stages, if you like, two moments, although they are they support each other, they are complementary. The first one is the stage of an analysis, where we map the existing arrangement in the governance. So who are the actors? Who is involved in the skills related policies? And who should have a say in the policy making, from the agenda setting through to the implementation, down to the review and assessment? So who are the actors? How do they interact? How do they communicate to each other, if you like? This is, I want to underline the communication among actors and institutions, because based on ETF analysis, from Torino process to other thematic specific analysis, we very much observe and take stock and note that communication and fluidity of cooperation among the different parts of the system is something that is often missing. So the first area of intervention, if you like, or the first stage is really to analyze, to map, to take stock and assess how the governance arrangements are effectively functioning. But the second one, I wouldn't say the most important, but absolutely very important, is how to move to new arrangements. We are talking about a real change process. The question is, if in a country, if in my country, there is a reform of VET, or there is a goal to move from vocational education and training as a somehow isolated policy onto a much more integrated lifelong learning approach, the question is the governance as it is now fit for purpose? If the system change, and if I want to change the system, I need to change the governance too, because arrangement or way institutions cooperate together may function in a given system, they may become obsolete or inefficient into a new context, a situation. What's really important here is always to avoid any supply-driven blueprint. We have, again, learned from practice that the approach in governance to adapt, to improve the governance is policy learning. It's never copy-paste. Next slide, please. Okay, having that said, I want to show you just one or maybe two of these indicators. We are not going into details now, but governance can and should change. It's difficult because it is about how institutions operate, but it is possible. And ETF uses a number of indicators, but say there are three broad and general indicators we use in order to monitor the progress in terms of development in governance of vet systems. And the number one is about the vision. So the question of this indicator, of the indicators, point to the fact whether the vision of vet, vision of the sector, vision of the policy, it's an holistic one, and if this vision is shared by the different actors, the public, governmental agencies, the non-governmental actors, the social partners. So it's very important to understand whether there is an agreement and a consensus and a common understanding. And here we can say that from 2017, which are the say horizontal data, where we had say 36% level 2. If we level 1 is low level, level 4 is high level. We had 36% of the 24 countries at intermediate level of, say, sharing and consensus and agreement about the national policy goals. Whereas in 2020, we have a majority of the countries, namely 17 out of 24, we have measured at level 3. So it is possible to work on the sharing, on the consensus, on the agreeing on what are the priorities, what are the strategic objectives, basically, if there is an investment and if there is a commitment to do that. So indicator number one. Indicator number two, I'm not going to spend much time on it, but it's about the so-called horizontal coordination. So this is about the mechanism whereby actors coordinate at each tier or each level of the governance. So how does it work that, for example, government social partners have an effective dialogue at national level about vocational education skills and about lifelong learning, and what about their cooperation at subnational level? So again, we see an improvement if we read the table horizontally and vertically from 2017 to 2020. I think now I will ask the help of my colleague to move on to the actual toolkit, because I think we stop now sharing slides and we rather move to the tool. The tool is located in the open space of the ETF. By now, most of you have already registered and entered. This is a space at the moment comprising around 2,500 members, which collects and presents in an interactive way the thematic areas and knowledge areas of the ETF. And one is governance. In the page of governance, you find the Vet Governance Toolkit, which now we are showing to you, and we can show the areas of the toolkit, and these areas are 7. The one is about presenting the key concepts and ideas of the multi-level governance and how they apply to VET. This is what I briefly introduced in my presentation. The number 2 is about a method for building vision in a participatory manner. The area 4 is about financing, very important. What about the costing, budgeting, financing and funding of skills policy, of vocational education and training? The area 5 is about social partnership, so the cooperation between public and private. The area 6 is about territorial governance, so what happens or what should and may happen at territorial level. And the area 7 is about the monitoring. It's very important to take stock at milestones, where we are, what have we achieved, and are we on track in attaining the policy goals set in our policy agenda. So we have 7 areas. Now, what do you find, or what do we find in these 7 areas? In each of the area, Erica, we can show the menu. So we have a menu on the right side, and if we click in each of
let me connect her.
In each of the area, there is someone talking. In each of the area, we see that 2 say sub areas. One is methodology and the other is in practice. Now we have highlighted the area 3, institutional arrangements. This is where my colleague Manuel will go more into specific examples when we'll divide in breakout rooms, so I'm not elaborating. What I want to say at the moment is that under these institutional arrangement areas in methodology, we can click on methodology, we find scroll down, a guide for the review of institutional arrangement. So this is so if you want, you click on it, and the idea of the toolkit is really to provide with tools. So all these tools are usable. Each country can apply, read through, and apply the methodology which is suggested in the guides that we provide. The country can ask the advice of ETF, and the country can work with other countries in pairs, in twinning, and so on. So this, in the methodology, is what you find is really an approach to guide you on how to review institutional arrangement. You remember, this is the first stage, which is always very crucial, to see who are the actors, what are they doing, what is the mandate of the various institutions, and how these various institutions coordinate together. And in the section in practice, you will find a concrete example of the work carried out by the ETF in several countries. The other area perhaps I want to now click on is area 5, social partnership. This is the area where I will go a little bit more into with your help when we'll divide when we will divide in the breakout rooms. Again, you find in the area social partnership a section with methodologies. We can click on methodology and just to give a on methodology and just we'll see from the menu that under methodology, we have a position paper of the ETF on social dialogue and social partnership. We have the work done on government and social partner cooperation, where we had identified that some of you did participate in this conference a couple of years ago. Actually, I'm very happy to see you here with us, where we identified 10 steps on 10 milestones that are very important in order to develop not only the dialogue, but concrete and operational partnership, and so on and so forth. Again, under social partnership, you find a section in practice where there are examples of country work. I only want to mention now, because I'm closing, that under area 5, there is also a new, more recent section dedicated to civil society organizations. And I think that more and more, as we move towards the implementation of lifelong learning policies, it is of utmost importance to recognize the role of civil society organizations. So they reach out groups of people that are not necessarily in the formal system. Maybe they have difficulty to access the formal system. But in essence, civil society organizations are part of the policy system. And it is very important as a first move to award a recognition to these organizations that they are part of the system. They are not outside, they are in. The question is governance. Okay, how do we involve them and how we collect their voice? Thank you very much. I stop here because I think it's more important at this stage, perhaps to hear and collect some of the questions. And therefore, back to you, Simona. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much. Voila, now I'm sure you can hear me. Thank you so much, Syria. Before moving to the question and answer session, just a quick information for those following us on the streaming. In case you wish to take a part to the full program of the day, you have a section which is called comment, and where you will find the link to register. So just in case you want to follow the full day, I think that actually, whatever there is a question in the chat, now we'll try to look for it. In any case, I'm sure you found in the chat at the beginning already some questions. Where do they come from? Those questions actually were brought forward from you at the registration form level, which means that we will now collect what are, let's call it, the immediate question. And then we will also have a look at those. No question will be lost in space. If some question will remain unanswered today, there will still be possibility to go through open space and to keep this dialogue open. I think we have what we call under the category immediate question. One question from Mr. Hamouti, who is talking about the challenge of the multi-stakeholder approach, which means two, having around the table people who understand that. I couldn't agree more, personally, at least. Second point, people who are committed. Third point, absence of an independent agency for evaluation, which I think is a reality in some of our countries. I don't know if Syria or Manuel would make a comment regarding those three challenges highlighted by Mr. Hamouti. You are muted.
My mic is mute, but I cannot unmute it. Yeah, okay. Comment. You highlight a very important condition, but at the same time, this is an area which calls for action and work. It is important to have around the table in the conversation on the policy and governance processes actors that are aware and that know the system very well from inside. This cannot be more true. It requires an investment where these say deep understanding or knowledge from inside not necessarily available or so spread. It identifies an area for action. It requires some time, but it's very important that all the parties take on their responsibility. And if we speak about the social partners, the private sector, when entering into dialogue with the government, they have to acquire and increase their knowledge and understanding of how the vet system works. And they also have to develop an awareness, I would say, not only technical knowledge, but also an awareness about the fact that they do play a role. They are not outside the system. They are part of the system. And in order to play their responsibility, they have to agree that they take on their shoulders part of the responsibility. So I would say it's a mix of capacity, is a mix also of self-awareness and development of understanding, and it takes time, but it's worth doing. I don't know if Manuel wants to add something.
Okay, okay, Manuel has nothing to add. Actually, I have a question for Manuel, because despite we don't have any question under the immediate category. Manuel, we had a question which was actually copied at the beginning of the chat, which, as I said earlier, came from the registration form, which was how to enhance social partner involvement in designing and implementing vet reform following the adoption of the Osnabrück Declaration. Mamma mia, what a difficult name. Manuel, do you have any immediate reaction, since actually social partnership, as also Syria highlighted, is more your area? In case, because Manuel is the only one who is not in our room, in case he has some technical problem, we can double check. Syria, I'm really sorry, I have to jump on you again. And can I ask you to reply to this question about the involvement of social partner in designing and implementing vet reforms following the adoption of the Osnabrück Declaration? So the question is about the how. If you have something on the what, it would be more than welcome, of course.
Yeah, this is
yours.
This is a question of Agnes, and thank you. It's a $1 million, but it is very, very important, and I want to thank Agnes for raising this issue. It is true that the Osnabrück Declaration has raised the level of the ambition, but it's also raised the level of the challenge. The Osnabrück Declaration, and if we look also at the lifelong learning of skills agenda, has set high indicators, high target for participation of people, young people, less young, adult people, people in the labor market, people outside the labor market, to participate in skills development opportunities in lifelong learning. And by raising the ambition of these targets and number of people who have to participate, of course, it requires, it imposes to system an additional effort. And when I say systems, I think it's clear now, I mean both the governmental agencies as well as the private sector, the social partners, including individual enterprises and non-governmental organization of civil society. So how to, it is a target of the Osnabrück Declaration really to have a much more cohesive decision-making and implementation procedures in order to allow such a change in the scale, such a change in magnitude of many more people attending learning opportunities on a regular basis. So how to reach this new level, it definitely requires a much stronger cooperation. It requires a more clear and institutionalized mechanism for collaboration at all levels. Let's not forget about the multi-level. So it's a national level, but it also should happen at sub-national level, regionally or locally, that the partners of all sides have the common vision, as we said, and they work for the same goal. But it also imposes a new level of responsibility and a new level of commitment, I would say, in order for more people learning to happen. So thank you for raising. It's a new challenge, and therefore it's a moment to revise and to review and to improve the governance, because the scale of the challenge is really the moment where you have to see whether the governance arrangements are effectively functioning or you need the new ones.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have actually 3 more minutes before moving to the other part of our 1.5 hour together. So before moving to that part, I think I would like to make a revenge of my colleague and building upon a question which has been brought forward by you as participants, which is the $1 million question. How can countries modernize vet governance? As we say in Italian, mamma mia. I'm not sure there is an answer. There are for sure different approaches and perspectives, but Siria, Manuel, would you have any immediate reaction on top of my mamma mia that would conclude this part? So how can we modernize? Is there any recipe to cure that we can share with our participants?
Recipe, yes, there are many recipes, but there are more challenges than recipes, actually. The most important approach, I would say, the first step, it's really what we have called the review stages. Are we tuned? Are we tuned onto what are the policy objectives and target we set for ourselves? Let's review how do we function now. This is the first important thing. And the second is really to deploy a project or an action plan. Don't think that governance is something abstract. Governance is very concrete. It's made of people interaction, is made of institutions, is made of processes. And we can change the processes. We can improve the processes. But we have to agree what is the change we want. And we have to agree on an action plan. And all the parties involved, they have to contribute and participate and have an agreed role and responsibility into the change process. This is also how we have designed the toolkit. You can take it as a guide to a change process with various steps, from vision building to institutional arrangement, to financing, to social partnership. Take the toolkit, this is our advice, as a guide to a change process. Make it like a project. Give yourself milestones, identify responsibilities, and monitor the progress. And this can be done.
Okay, so how to say, thank you so much. So it was a $1 million question. So I think she would deserve a $2 million for the answer, which I think was really to the point. We have in the meantime some comments from Georgia about actually the maturity of, for example, countries that are facing young democracies. And also we have our comment on the vertical horizontal dimension of governance. Actually, I think those comments are super important. As I said at the beginning, the story doesn't end here. You know, as we work in ETF, there is always a second part, which is our open space. So to be continued in open space, as well as the other question which were in the chat and brought forward from you. So what we would do now, I would say goodbye to all the people that are following us on streaming, since actually, unless they have registered in the meantime, we will now move to the breakout room. So goodbye to everyone in streaming.